Welcome to the podcast. This week, we're talking about independent consulting burnout, kind of that time of year. If you're listening to this in the real time, it's November. You've gone through this whole gauntlet this year, and it can be really easy to start experiencing some burnout, either more situational burnout or general burnout. And so that's why I want to share with you today the formula to overcome burnout, to prevent burnout, and to be able to experience that fulfillment and satisfaction from your business. You're independent for a reason. You're out on your own. You get to make up your own rules. You get to make as much money as you want to make. You get to set your own schedule, and you get to choose and create a business where you're feeling fulfilled, where you feel that sense of joy, and where you don't have to recreate any burnout that you might have experienced in corporate or that you think is just part and parcel of being a business owner. It doesn't have to be that way. And today I want to share with you the formula for you to, like I said, either overcome burnout if that's where you're at right now, prevent it, either if you know that you're on the verge of it, or just generally speaking, to put the processes and steps in place, foundation in place for your business so that you don't have to worry about getting burned out. So basically, if you are in burnout now, on the verge of burnout, or simply want to repeat it, this is the episode for you. I think that pretty much encompasses every independent consultant. But really, we're here today to help you with that formula to recognize and overcome and prevent the burnout. So with that, our focus, our agenda for today is, first, we're going to talk about recognizing burnout. What does it look like? What are the symptoms? What are the impacts? Then I'll share with you a 3-step solution to overcoming the burnout and preventing the burnout. And then we'll end here today with a couple of examples, I think 3 examples specifically for you to implement in terms of short and longer term strategies to prevent and reverse the burnout. So I'll give you that solution, but then I'll also give you some very specific strategies to implement for yourself. So with that, let's talk about a tool that I wanted to share with you before we get started. It is called the Independent Consulting Productivity Assessment. I've been making these assessments. It's so fun to create these assessments for you. And I get a lot of feedback about how valuable they are to help you recognize your blind spots, to see what is working so you can amplify it, and just generally compare what you're doing for your business against some of the best practices that I've curated over my 10 years of being an independent consultant and working with independent consultants daily, so that you can really see where you may have some opportunities for yourself in your business. So with that, I've created the Independent Consulting Productivity Assessments, and you can go find that at productiveic.com. So the letters IC, the word productive, the 2 letters IC.com. And we'll put that link in the show notes as well. Okay, so now that we have that tool and that companion resource available for you, let's start in and just talk about some of the foundations of burnout. So I always like looking up the definition. What is burnout? Because there's so many, it's a term we throw around so much, I think, in our society, and especially as it relates to work. And so I want to make sure we're on the same page about what is burnout. And the best definition I found looking out there on Google, our friends at Google, is from the Merriam-Webster dictionary. And it simply defines burnout as the exhaustion of physical or emotional strength or motivation, usually as a result of prolonged stress or frustration. I'll read that to you again because I think there's so many key elements in here. Exhaustion of physical or emotional strength or motivation, usually as a result of prolonged stress or frustration. The key here being feeling exhausted emotionally, usually emotionally, also physically, losing your motivation, and caused by prolonged stress or frustration. So remember this definition, because we're going to start tackling some of these elements of the burnout as I share with you the strategies to overcome and even prevent the burnout in the first place. As a result, you're feeling depleted. You're feeling that fatigue. You're feeling that lack of motivation potentially. So I just ask you, as you're listening to this, think about where you're at right now. Perhaps you're on the verge of burnout, or perhaps you are in burnout, or perhaps you remember a time where you were in burnout, either as a business owner or in your corporate career. So think about that context as we go through today's episode. And you know the impact, but just to reinforce this, the impact if you're feeling that mental and emotional exhaustion as a result of the prolonged stress and frustration, of course, your performance is going to be impacted. Either your performance as a consultant, delivering for your clients, or your performance as a business owner, or usually both. Oftentimes, your personal life is impacted. Kind of on the good end of the scale is you're irritable and kind of short. On the more challenging end of the scale, the impact of the burnout might be that you're avoiding your friends and family, or that you're just have completely depleted and have nothing else to give. And you don't have that, aren't able to even muster the strength for that sense of, balance in your life. You might be questioning if your consulting business is sustainable. I hear this from so often. Is this even sustainable for me? If I'm gonna create this dynamic in my business where I'm constantly stressed and worried about revenue and cash flow and where my next client's going to come from and what I'm charging for those clients, and having to feel like I'm, need to maximize my billable hours. Is this even sustainable? And of course, if you're thinking that, you're starting to entertain thoughts of going back to corporate. I hear this a lot. I need like a little respite from my business. Maybe I'll just go park myself in corporate for a little bit and regroup. What I want to share with you today is the formula to overcome and eventually prevent this burnout, so that you don't have to worry about whether your business is sustainable or not, whether this lifestyle as a business owner is sustainable. And ultimately, you don't have to worry about going back to corporate to relieve the burnout. If you want to go back to corporate, no problem. That's not the issue here. What the issue is feeling like that's your only solution to a situation where you've gotten yourself into this burnout state. So let's just take a step back for a moment, thinking about what is burnout and the impacts of the burnout for you, whether you're experiencing it or want to really protect yourself from experiencing it. Let's think about the causes of the burnout. And the definition really alluded to this. That's the word I'm looking for. The definition alluded to the causes of the burnout, but I want to really emphasize this because I think it's so important. A lot of times we think the burnout is created by the workload or the nature of the work, or the fact that you've got to juggle both working on your business and working in your business. You've got to juggle generating leads and creating revenue for your business and then delivering it. We think that burnout is caused by that. We think about burnout is caused by this constant need to feel that you need to maximize your billings just in case the other shoe drops and you lose a client or you have a gap in revenue. We think that burnout is caused by not having enough time for things that are rejuvenating. Or we might think that the burnout is caused by demanding people, demanding clients, demanding, whatever's in our life. And so a lot of times we think about those as being the cause of the stress and the frustration. And so, of course, if you're thinking that the workload or the demanding people, the demanding clients, or the nature of the work is the cause, then of course you would assume that the fix to the burnout is to change those things. That's where the idea that comes in play of, well, maybe I'll just kind of wipe the slate clean and go back to corporate, or maybe I'll wipe the slate clean and just take on easier projects, or the only fix to my burnout is to be able to increase my billings, my pricing significantly in order to create more space for myself. Those are the types of solutions that we think when we believe that the cause of the burnout are those external things, the workload, the nature of the work, the demanding people, the amount of time we have or don't have. But the actual root cause here is how you're thinking about all that workload, how you're feeling about that workload, how you're thinking about the demanding people, how you're feeling about the demanding people. And ultimately those things, that talk track going on in your mind over and over and over again accumulates over time. It builds up the stress. If you're thinking about those things, create the stress, it builds up over time. And I'm going to give you an example of this to really clearly illustrate what I'm talking about when I'm sharing with you the root cause of your burnout, which is your thinking and the way you're thinking about things and the way you're feeling about things. We talk a lot about mindset on this podcast for a reason, because it's one of the best levers that you have access to control in your business. So as we're wrapping up this framework about what causes the burnout, I'll just summarize it by saying nothing needs to change about what you're doing in your business, your workload, the nature of the work you're doing, the demanding or not demanding clients you're working with. Nothing about that needs to change unless you want it to. Nothing about that needs to change in order to overcome burnout. What you will want to implement, and I'll share with you more specifics about this, the shift to recover and prevent the burnout comes from your ability to manage your mental and emotional states. So I'm going to share with you a couple of very specific examples here, so to illustrate what I'm talking about. And the first one is my own personal experience in burnout. It happened to me when I was still in my corporate role, but it's so relevant here to any of us who are experiencing or on the verge of, or even wanting to prevent burnout as business owners. I had been at my SaaS startup company for about 10 years before. It was 12 years before becoming an independent consultant, but about 10 years in, I experienced this intense, depleting burnout that took me 18 months to recover from. So I want to kind of walk you through that and share with you how I know firsthand, in addition to working with so many clients that I see these same patterns in, how I know firsthand that it is all about the way that you're thinking and the feelings that emotional state of stress that's generated as a result of your thinking, and not about the external circumstances. So let me describe this to you. So I was working at that SaaS startup company that I helped to build from the ground up. It was about 10 years into this. I mean, that's a long time at a startup, 10 years. That's a long time of just not knowing, is this going to succeed or fail, and doing the work of 2 or 3 people. The first 10 years were very hard, long hours, repeated travel, global travel, local, internet, domestic travel, global travel, constant pressure to generate revenue, to create numbers that the board would allow us to continue operating for another quarter or year. So many personnel challenges of hiring people into an unknown quantity, challenges of exiting people that weren't performing, challenges of my own team getting burned out. It was a lot. You can relate to this, I'm sure, in your corporate experience. It was a lot of pressure. It was the work of probably more than 1 or 2 or people. I wasn't burned out. Those first 10 years, I was not burned out. There was a lot of exhaustion. There was a lot of stress. There was a lot of frustration, but I was able to rebound because emotionally and logically, so all of the thinking that was driving the work that I was doing was about what an impact I was making, was about my thought, if we were to look at kind of a pie chart of the types of thoughts that I had at that time, it was probably 80 or 90% thoughts that were productive, thoughts about what a great impact I was making, thoughts about how much the clients were benefiting from the software and services that we were creating, thoughts about this company's going to work. I know we're going to figure out how to make it work. Of course, that wasn't 100% of the time, but 80 to 90% of the time, they were really high quality thoughts about how do we solve the problems that we're facing? How do I make this easier for all of us? How do we make to implement, for example, the software? How do we make it more impactful for our clients? How do we productize this? It was constant problem solving and thinking about myself in a way that was productive, that I was making a difference, that people respected me, that my opinions and recommendations were valued. So that's what prevented me from being burned out, even given those extreme, some would say extreme circumstances for it to go through for 10 years. Now, of course, there were ups and downs. I'm not saying it was all rosy. It definitely wasn't. But I never reached a burnout state because at the end of the day, my thoughts were very much in line with this is working. I'm good at this. I can be successful. People value what I'm doing. Now, under the covers, I'm sure there were a lot of people who didn't value or appreciate what I was doing, right? But those were the overarching thoughts that I had about the situation. And so in times of exhaustion or stress or frustration, I was able to rebound. Now, look at the last 2 years at this organization. We had a reorg, happened to be on maternity leave. I went on maternity leave, had been married for, 10 years, I guess, at that time. Go on maternity leave, and then I'm reorged. Come back, no longer reporting to the CEO, reporting to a COO who, that's a long story. Reporting to a COO that, quite frankly, I didn't respect. We'll just leave it at that. And just felt like the rug had been ripped out from under me. I was still on the executive team, but so much of the impact that I was able to make before going on this maternity leave that I had been making for 10 years felt like that rug had been ripped out from under me. We had a new CEO. Now I had a layer between me and the CEO. I felt like I was constantly fighting for influence and alignment about what I believed was the best thing for the business. And this new CEO and COO were not interested in my opinions or recommendations or experience, quite frankly. The experience that I'd accumulated over the course of 10 years was now seen as a liability because, quote unquote, fresh thinking was really valued at that time. I don't think I mentioned this, but in that same sort of period of time that we sold the company. And so we had new private equity, a new CEO, a new CFO, a new COO, and then around that time I went on maternity leave. So all of these things changed. All of the rules of engagement changed. I actually ended up with less workload, less pressure as a result of all of this. And that's the point at which I hit burnout. I didn't hit burnout in all of those other circumstances I was describing to you. I ended up hitting burnout when the workload was less, when I wasn't reporting to the CEO and I had a layer in between us. The reason why I hit burnout, and I'm sharing this with you to illustrate why the burnout comes from the way you're thinking about things. I hit burnout because I started thinking, if we go back to the pie chart I shared with you, 80% of my thinking, probably 95% of my thinking was all about how challenging it was, how what I was doing wasn't making a difference, how frustrating it was that the CEO and COO were quote unquote, in my opinion, running our company into the ground. And I couldn't do anything about it. And how unjust so many things were happening. It wasn't about the workload. It was about the way I was looking at the situation. In one case, I was looking at the situation as I am making an impact. This is making a difference. I am able to, help shape the trajectory of this company and of the people on my team. The last 2 years, I was thinking thoughts and taking this all so personally that now I've been marginalized. Now, no one who is making the ultimate decisions cares what about my experience or what I have to say, and that's what created the burnout. So hopefully, in me sharing this personal story, it helps to illustrate the difference of where the burnout is coming from. It's in my case, it was coming from all of this emotional and mental state that I was in, worrying about the company and the longer term impacts of the reorganization, not only on me, but also on so many of us who had built the company up until that point, and whether the company was going to succeed or not as a result of all of these changes. There were some bad results that came from this process that I will tell you I was right in some ways, but that's not the point here at all. The point here is I wish I knew now. I'm sorry, I wish I knew then what I know now, which is if I had protected my mental and emotional states proactively and not taken things so personally, I could have avoided that burnout that took me literally resigning. I did agree to come, to stay with the company as a consultant. That's how I started my business, but that's a story for a different day. It took me resigning, moving to Hawaii, and completely dismantling my entire career. And still after that, 18 months to recover from the burnout. So again, I share this with you as an illustration to say, it's not the nature of your business. It's not the types of clients you're working with. It's not the billable hours even that you're putting in. That's the source of your burnout. If you're in burnout or on the verge of burnout, or even, wanting to protect yourself or prevent the burnout. What it is you being able to protect that emotional state and creating intentionally those productive thought processes about the situations that you're in, so you can problem solve, creating those productive thought processes and problem solving so that you see that this is not personal. You might be in a tricky situation with a client. It isn't personal. If you make it personal, they're not paying me as much as they should be, or they aren't appreciating the work that I'm doing. Or I could have done this work, why am I keep doing this? I could have done this work 10 years ago. Or as a business owner, I'm not good at generating leads, or I'm terrible at sales. All of those types of thought processes, without redirecting and managing them, which I'll share with you in a minute what that looks like, that repeated over time builds up the stress and the frustration and leads to burnout. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a really good example of the burnout and where it comes from, and where it doesn't come from. It doesn't have to come from how many hours you're working, or the nature of the work you're doing, or even whether your clients are difficult or not, or whether you're good at sales or not. That's not where the burnout comes from. The burnout is coming from that unrelenting second guessing, the unrelenting self-doubt that you might be running off of, the unrelenting worrying that takes place for so many of us as independent consultants. Without managing that, over time it accumulates, and that's what creates the burnout. So the solution to the burnout is to I'll give you 3 steps here. And I want you to take these 3 steps from multiple perspectives. Take the 3 steps from you as the consultant working in your business. Take the 3 steps I'm going to share with you in a second about you as your own manager. Take the 3 steps as you as the CEO. So really think about all the different roles you play in your business, and then go through these 3 steps I'm going to give you. The first is to identify where you're at on the burnout scale from a scale of 1 to 10. You might be really burned out from a consultant working in your business, the delivery version of yourself. You might not be as burned out as the CEO of the business, like running the business and the things you need to do running the business, or it might be the reverse. Think about which of those personas that you're operating from, and there are multiple, which of those is really burned out? Is it all of them, or is it just one of them, or one or two of them? Then ask yourself why. Why are you burned out? Why is it that let me restate that. Why is it that number? So we did the scale of 1 to 10. Why is it that number? It might be a 1. You're not burned out at all. Why is it that number? You want to amplify that. If it's a 9, you want to really look at what is causing the stress. What are you thinking about yourself and your business and your clients? What are you driving? Like for me, for example, as I was sharing with you, one of my overarching thoughts over and over again is they don't value anything I'm doing here. Of course, you're going to be burned out. It doesn't matter if you're working 20 hours a week. If you feel like what you're doing is not valuable, or what you're doing is not making a difference, or you're spinning your wheels, of course, you're going to create stress that builds up and ultimately leads to burnout. Is there anything about your business practices that are causing a buildup of stress? Maybe you're thinking like I have to be responsive to my client no matter what. And then you're operating off of fear, which is building up stress. So that's the second step. Why is it the number you chose on that burnout scale? And again, we're doing this for each of your personas. You as the consultant working in your business, you as the CEO, you as potentially the manager of the consultant working in your business, you managing yourself. Like think about the different roles you're playing in your business and answer these 3 questions from those perspectives. And then the first one was, where are you at on that burnout scale, 1 to 10? The second is why is it that number? And then the third is, what are the short and long-term strategies that you can develop and implement in order for each of those business personas to reduce the number back down again? Maybe you want it to be a 2. What would be the strategies for you to implement to make it a 2, for example? So let me give you an example of how this works in practice, and then I will share with you, we'll wrap up here today with some very specific strategies you might consider for some common scenarios for you as an independent consultant. So here's the example of how this works in real life, applying the strategy that I just gave you. So I had a client who came to me. She was incredibly burned out, very much indexing her business on maximizing billable hours, building up a stockpile of money for herself, even though it was more than what she had budgeted from a revenue perspective, for her goal. But she just was on this train really of, I need to make as much money as possible. Really, it wasn't about needing the money to pay her bills, or because she had cleared that bar. It wasn't about needing the money to save and create a reserve for her business. She had cleared that bar. It was more about creating as much money as possible to feel like she was successful and good at this. So there was like a never-ending pit. But like there's never a time where you clear the bar with that frame of mind that you say, you know what, I'm doing great. It's like a never-ending pit that you can trying to feed that never says they're satiated, right? So she was overworking and we'll call it undertaking care of herself in so many different ways, mentally and physically. And even going on vacation here and there, or taking off a little bit of time here and there, not working on Fridays, none of that helped. The burnout for her was coming from this unrelenting second guessing. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. What am I missing? I should have handled that client meeting differently. I should be doing more for working on my business, not just working in my business. I should have a bigger pipeline. Just unrelenting, second guessing and feeling like she wasn't doing the right thing and worrying about the business and whether or not she was doing it right and whether or not the clients would think that she was qualified to be charging what she had been charging them, which by the way was undercharging them, but that's a different topic. And just overcomplicating everything as a result of this insecurity. that created all of the burnout. It's like going back to the example I gave you of myself. She could have been working all of these, hours. She could be working with juggling multiple clients at once. That's not what was causing her burnout. What was causing her burnout is what I love to describe as like this unrelenting worry and frustration and second guessing that so many independent consultants have over and over and over again. And so that's where the burnout was coming from her, for her. And for you, it may be something similar. It might not be necessarily unrelenting, like just this constant talk track in your brain, but it could be something that's just there, subtly running in the background all of the time, almost like taunting you over and over again. Do you know what you're doing? Are you going to succeed? What happens if the economy continues, into a recession? What if the client decides not to work with you anymore? How is this, whatever going to impact me? It's just this, it could be unrelenting talk track, or it could be more of a subtle kind of background music going on at all times. But without managing that, without questioning it, without really being aware of it and redirecting it, that's what over time accumulates, either quickly or over a longer period of time, to create the burnout. And so, as I described to you with that 3-step solution, what the client and I did together was really tackled 2 things, like really understand first and foremost for her where the burnout was coming from, that root cause. What was she thinking and feeling, which I just shared with you a lot of that, and then started tackling that. What I call is catching these inadequacy cycles and learning the tools to generate confidence and fulfillment on demand without any of those external factors changing. It's a concept of protecting the asset. You are the asset. So we worked on that really in a diligent way, the mental and emotional management skills and tools to overcome this taunting that was going on in her brain that happens for so many of us. And then once we got that, into a place where it didn't, for her, I don't think felt fixed, quote unquote, but it definitely felt like we kind of created a foundation that wasn't so shaky. Then we were able to start looking at some changes to our business model. We increased the pricing. We changed the client filter about who she would work with and who she wouldn't work with, and saying no to clients instead of, taking quote unquote a bird in the hand. And then we got some support for her in terms of an admin and a junior consultant to do a little bit of the work offline and support her that way. So, but again, it came from first working on the mental and emotional side of this, so we could create a stronger foundation from which to make those shifts in the business model. So let's wrap up here today with the examples of those long and short-term strategies. Okay, so there's 3 examples we're going to walk through here just to illustrate a couple of ideas that I will share with you for short and long-term strategies to overcome, recover from, and eventually prevent the burnout. So the first example is you might be creating burnout for yourself through constant worrying. Like we were talking about earlier, it might be more of a subtle talk track going on, or it might be even just really at the forefront, relentless. Whichever it is, doesn't matter so much as knowing that constant worrying, as an example, is happening for you in your mind, and consciously and subconsciously. So once you identify that worrying is happening, it might show up in the form of anxiety or fear, or just like a pit in your stomach. When you notice that worrying is happening, you can then start designing using those 3 steps I gave you. Really, first being aware of it, understanding why you're having it. What are the thoughts that are creating that worrying? Like, I don't know what I'm doing, or I'm not good at this, or, this is not sustainable, those types of thoughts. from a short-term strategy perspective, a few of the things that you can be doing is noticing that you are thinking in this way that's creating the worrying. So doing some journaling, for example, to say, what am I thinking about right now? Let me put pen to paper to figure out what is generating this anxiety or what is generating this worry. Notice what you're thinking in order to create the worrying. Also, another short-term strategy is to sit down and really establish the true facts. So, for example, if you've done this journaling I just recommended to you, you understand what is more at the heart of the worry and anxiety, and then really asking yourself, is this true? How is this not true? And really establishing the true facts, because so often the anxiety and worry comes from us, our natural tendency as humans to catastrophize, to think about the worst case scenario, to almost never give ourselves credit for what really is, and just allowing this default thinking, which creates the worry, to run rampantly, which usually there's a very little truth in whatever is running rampant in your brain. So getting control of that through journaling, getting clear on what is creating the anxiety, and then ultimately what is actually true. So you can go to work on the facts versus on these out of control perceptions that are probably happening in your brain. Then from a longer-term perspective, one of the strategies you might employ for that constant worrying is to establish for yourself as a business owner a daily routine to manage your mind. Figure out what works for you as it relates to creating and reinforcing and replacing your mindset and up-leveling it into that CEO level mindset. So this is the type of work that I do with my clients, helping them to create and refine and develop a routine that works best for them as they are needing to manage their mind on a daily basis to avoid these kind of runaway trains that happen in our mind if we're not doing that. That can be an incredibly effective long-term strategy. I know for me, I have a very specific routine that I know works very well to move myself out of anxiety and into confidence and commitment, for example, into certainty. And I can definitely tell the effects when I fall out of that routine on my emotional state, on my mental state, and know exactly how to get back into what I know works best to make sure that I'm thinking in a really high quality level as a CEO and business owner versus as what my mind might give me by default, which is someone who's still figuring it out. That gives you an example. So for a long-term strategy to combat that constant worrying that ultimately creates burnout if left unmanaged, you want to create that type of daily routine for yourself. Let's use a couple of other examples as we're finalizing this burnout process here today. The other one might be that something that's fueling or causing your burnout is potentially overworking without mentally resetting. So you might be working, trying to maximize your billable hours and not really spending any time resetting. I was just talking to a client a minute ago who was sharing, she said, I don't even know if I've taken a day off in the last couple of years. I'm always doing something for my business. And that happens for so many of us as independent consultants. We don't give that literal space in our calendar, and which is the physical manifestation of it. But then when we don't have that, then we don't give our mind the time to take that break that it needs, and then we're fueling the stress and the frustration and creating the burnout. So the short-term strategy for that overworking or not taking that mental break is to really set and stick to a revenue goal, for example. More isn't better. Especially if you're working on a daily or hourly rates, you just deciding I'm just going to make as much as I can, very likely will lead you to burnout. It might take 5 years or it might take 5 months. I don't, depending on where you're starting from, but really knowing this is my revenue goal. This is how I'm going to achieve the revenue goal, and creating a revenue goal in a way that, feels really good to you with respect to what bills you need to pay and what you want to accomplish on a professional level for your business, and not falling into this trap that more is better. You created a goal for a reason, set that goal, stick to it, and don't get tempted into the overworking as a short-term strategy. Also, setting and sticking to your business calendar, creating working hours for yourself and honoring them, creating days off for yourself and honoring them, knowing that the entire plan you put in place is for a reason, partially for you to protect your asset, you, from burning out. Those are a couple of short-term strategies. And then in the longer term, you want to start working your business into a model that does support you having space for yourself and for you to think as a CEO, for example. So you're not just on this hamster wheel. So that might look like, from a longer term strategy perspective, reducing dependency on your current clients, creating a better lead generation process so you have the ability to pick and choose who you're working with, changing your pricing model so it's not attached to you spending time to make money. Those are some of the longer term strategies. And then finally, the third example I'll give you, as in terms of how to create short and long-term strategies, is the example of just really not feeling acknowledged or appreciated or challenged in the type of work you're doing. You might have taken on a client that you can, quote unquote, do the work in your sleep. And then you feel bored. I hear this so often. Or I just don't feel fulfilled because of this. And so these are really important to acknowledge, first of all, that this is happening, and that that over time that leads to frustration, which can lead to the burnout you either may be experiencing or we want to prevent you from experiencing. So a short-term strategy is to think about yourself, as I was just sharing a little bit ago in the personas. Look, you're your own manager here. If your consultant, the person delivering the work, isn't appreciated, it's on you. It's on you as the person who's running the company to make your other part of yourself who's delivering feel appreciated. Most likely you're criticizing that person, telling them they should be more efficient, telling them that you should, be doing things differently, telling them that, constantly berating your employee, which is you, right? Are you constantly berating your employee? As the CEO of your business, are you berating yourself in the sense of the version of you who is delivering the work? Put those couple of hats on and then think about it from the CEO's perspective. How would you create that kind of employee appreciation? If you had an employee, you were back in corporate and you had an employee who was a flight risk, who you really highly valued, how would you be treating that person? And start thinking about it for yourself in those personas that you're playing. And then from a longer term strategy, you might, if you are in this situation where you're feeling bored or not challenged or not fulfilled or not appreciated, you may look at your business model and think about shifting the nature of your work, or revisiting and refining who your ideal client is and what your filtering process is. And learning, the third longer term strategy is learning to create internally that appreciation and that fulfillment versus needing something external to happen to create it. That's the ultimate in power as a business owner and an independent consultant. So that's what I have for you here today to overcome and prevent the burnout. I want to remind you to go take that independent consultant's productivity assessment, so you can see in a little bit broader scale where you might be watering down your own productivity, and be able to address it through after having that awareness and an action plan that I'll give you after you take the assessment. And then also, if you're interested in what it looks like to work with me as a private client, this is a great time to do it. I'm booking up clients for next year already. If you're listening to this in the real time, you can go to consultmelissa.com and book your consultation, and we'll talk about your business and your goals and what your current obstacles are. And if I know that I can help you as a coach, we'll talk about what that would look like. If it's not a good fit, then I'll give you recommendations and strategies for you to go and implement. So it's worth your time to have that call and to explore if you've been, on the fence or thinking about, is private coaching a good next step for me, especially as we're moving into next year. All right. So thank you for tuning in, and I will see you again next week. Take care.